"What's wrong? Are you okay?" When I asked, she said she hadn't eaten in days. The woman was wearing dirty clothes, and her hair was a mess. Her messy hair covered most of her face. She looked like something out of a horror movie, like a cursed ghost. On top of that, she hadn't bathed, and her body odor was strong. "Oh, she's homeless." I guess that makes sense, but I didn't know women could be homeless too. As I was about to walk past her, my father's words echoed in my head, "Don't ignore people in need." I stopped and reached out my hand to the woman, without knowing that this action could lead me to become unemployed. People are precious. Always help one another and cherish the bonds you make. Even if someone betrays you, never betray others yourself. And don't walk past someone in need. That was my father's teaching. As a child, I often got into fights. I grew up in a housing complex and would often run around the empty lots with kids my age. Back then, boys mostly played baseball and would often fight with kids from other neighborhoods over who got to use the empty lot. In those days, parents didn't intervene in kids' fights, so kids would just end on their own. However, whenever my father found out I'd been in a fight, he would say those words to me during dinner. As a kid, I didn't really care about what he said. When I was in upper elementary school, my father passed away from an illness. Ever since then, whenever I pray at his altar, those words of his come flooding back to me. I've carried my father's words as a keepsake and a guide for how to live my life. In high school, my grades weren't bad, but since I grew up in a single-parent household and money was tight, I went straight to work after graduation. Because of my good grades, I was hired by a big company, which was rare for someone with only a high school diploma. My mother was so happy that I, with just a high school education, had gotten into such a big company. Though she had been weak after my job offer, she seemed to regain her strength. At my job, everyone else had graduated from prestigious national universities or top private schools. I felt out of place as a high school graduate, but everyone recognized my passion and effort, so they respected the hard work I put in. As I continued working hard, I was given the opportunity to join a project, and that project turned out to be a success. Kenneth, the senior leader of the project, praised me for my contribution. He acknowledged my analytical skills, my attention to detail, my organization of documents, and the precision of my work. He said, "The project succeeded thanks to you. You really helped us." Thank you, and expressed his gratitude. Looking back, I think Kenneth's words were meant to motivate me even more. After that, I was called in by my manager, Tyler, who told me that another project was in the works. One that could be worth $30 million if successful. I was appointed as a member of this new project. Being selected to join such a major project alongside my college-educated seniors was incredibly encouraging. And I was thrilled from the bottom of my heart. I studied every day, determined to succeed in the project and catch up to the others. Even though the company was filled with highly educated people, the harder I worked, the more results I achieved, and the more I was recognized. People are precious. Always help one another and cherish the bonds you make. Holding on to my father's words, I was deeply satisfied with the environment where I was making more and more connections through my work. In my personal life, I wasn't seeing anyone, and since joining the company, I had been entirely focused on work. Then one day, Tyler announced that a new person would be joining the company. Apparently, the newcomer was a relative of the president, Mr. Harrison, and his name was Kevin. He was also a graduate of Tokyo University, known to be exceptionally sharp. He was much older than me and was joining the company as a mid-career hire, so I braced myself to stay competitive. Little did I know that Kevin's arrival would dramatically change my life. When Kevin joined, I taught him the ropes as if he were a new employee. Since he was much older than me, it honestly felt awkward. But I figured it would be better to teach him thoroughly to help him learn quickly, so I walked him through every detail. However, he didn't appreciate being treated like a newbie, often frowning as if to say, "I don't need you to tell me that." For several months, I endured his attitude while teaching him the job. About 6 months later, Kevin was promoted to section chief. As expected of a relative of Mr. Harrison, he rose through the ranks quickly. Within a year, I found myself working under him, our roles reversed. Wow, already a section chief, and he barely knows his job? I overheard senior employees making remarks like that. Even though his co-workers were trying to teach him, Kevin was slow to pick things up. Is he really a graduate of Tokyo University? Some people even started to question that. This company may be large, but it's family-run. Several of the board members are relatives of Mr. Harrison. Naturally, Kevin would likely become one of them in the future. While the senior staff were frustrated with his inability to grasp the work, they knew that if word of this reached the board, it would be the end of their careers. So they reluctantly treated Kevin with respect, not wanting to jeopardize their standing in the company. As Kevin's rank increased, he started delegating his own mundane tasks to his subordinates. "I'm too busy as a manager to handle these trivial tasks. Kyle, input this data for me, will you?" Lately, he's been dumping all of his work on me. Since he never deals with the details himself, when other employees ask him for advice, he tells them to check with someone else. Truthfully, he just doesn't know the answers. The senior staff have no intention of picking up Kevin's slack, so they subtly pass all the work down to me, his direct subordinate. They skillfully avoid getting involved. In this respect, they're quite clever. Unlike them, I'm not calculating enough to dodge these tasks, so I naively accept them, causing my workload to increase even more. However, despite taking on all of these extra tasks, I still had to finish my main responsibilities within regular working hours. When complaints came in, I inevitably ended up taking the blame. Kevin never took responsibility. He always shifted it onto the person who had done the work. This forced me to improve the accuracy of my own work even more. As I spent my days buried in work, I found that my skill level had unknowingly risen. And I gained a reputation within the company for being able to handle tasks quickly and precisely. But this project was a massive $30 million initiative, and incompetence wasn't an excuse. I tried to carve out time to help Kevin catch up with the rest of the team, but he would just say, "Look, you're a high school graduate, so you handle it. You're fast at this stuff anyway." I would reply, "Kevin, if you don't get involved in the work yourself, you won't be able to make accurate decisions when something goes wrong. If you start now, you'll be able to keep pace with the senior staff as the project progresses." Even though I offered this advice out of kindness, he always found an excuse not to do it. Instead, whenever there was a client meeting or social event, he was quick to join the senior staff. "Kyle, can you check this document? I've got a client dinner, so I'm counting on you." With a big smile, he'd quickly get ready and leave the office with the others. As Kevin walked out, the other team members would watch him with skeptical expressions. As the project progressed, even employees who hadn't interacted with Kevin before started asking, "Kyle, is Kevin really fit to be on this project? He doesn't seem to understand anything." More and more people began doubting his credentials. According to someone from another department who had joined the project, Kevin had been hired because of his family ties with Mr. Harrison. And there wasn't even a resume on file for him. With the senior staff being so capable, Kevin's incompetence made him stick out like a sore thumb in the team. Normally, someone like him would have been removed from the project, but because he was a relative of Mr. Harrison, no one dared to suggest it to Tyler. Kevin wasn't actually assigned much work on this project. In reality, he was just a figurehead boss. Even so, the team couldn't stand Kevin just sitting around acting all high and mighty. The senior staff tried to assign him tasks, but even when they did, Kevin couldn't handle them, and they eventually ended up back with me. Because of this, the team started seriously doubting his Tokyo University credentials. One day, Jacob, a senior colleague and also a Tokyo University graduate, struck up a conversation with him. "Kevin, I heard you graduated from Tokyo University. It's nice to talk to a fellow alumnus after so long. I heard you passed on your first try. Impressive." Jacob spoke to Kevin in a nostalgic tone. At first, Kevin responded with a grin, but as Jacob began asking about which department he belonged to and which professors he studied under, Kevin's responses became increasingly vague. Eventually, he admitted, "Actually, the whole Tokyo University graduate thing. It's something Tyler started saying on his own." "I never said that." Those of us listening nearby weren't surprised. We had all suspected as much and were simply disappointed to have our suspicions confirmed. "Is this a case of resume fraud?" We heard a few mutters, but since it was Tyler who had introduced him as a Tokyo University grad, Kevin had never directly made the claim himself. Still, we had a project to complete, so we focused on the work, paying little attention to Kevin. On the day of the client meeting, I woke up earlier than usual to go over the materials one last time. Kevin was scheduled to present the documents we had prepared to the client, and I wanted to make sure everything was in order. After buying a sandwich from a nearby convenience store, I was walking through a small park to take a shortcut when I saw a woman collapsed on the ground. I stuffed the sandwich in my mouth and ran over to her. She was curled up, clutching her stomach, lying in a fetal position. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" When I asked, she said she hadn't eaten in days. She was a frail woman, dressed in filthy clothes, her hair a tangled mess. Her long hair was draped down her back, covering most of her face. She looked like something straight out of a horror movie, like a cursed ghost. On top of that, it was clear she hadn't bathed in a while, and her body odor was strong. "Oh, she's homeless." I guess that makes sense, but I didn't know women could be homeless too. I was about to leave her there, thinking there wasn't much I could do, but then my father's words flashed in my mind. "Don't walk past someone in need." I stopped and reached for my wallet, intending to give her some money, so she could buy something to eat. But as I looked at her more closely, I realized something was wrong. Her breathing was labored, and through the gaps in her messy hair, I could see sweat on her pale face. She looked like she was in serious pain. I decided she wasn't just hungry, and she was unwell, so I called an ambulance. While waiting for the ambulance, she continued to struggle. I couldn't just leave her lying on the ground, so I gently picked her up, despite the strong odor and her dirty appearance, and laid her on a nearby bench. After a while, the ambulance arrived with sirens blaring, and the paramedics rushed over. I explained the situation to them, and they took her to the hospital. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, I felt sorry for her. I took all the cash I had in my wallet and gave it to her, telling her to use it for her treatment. "This is too much. I can't accept it." Before she could finish, I handed her over to the paramedics and left the park. As I walked away, I heard her calling out, "Wait, please," but I didn't look back. I was too worried about being late for the client meeting. I checked my watch as I walked and realized I was already running late. Damn, I'm going to be late. I started sprinting as fast as I could. Out of breath, I arrived at the client's office, gave the receptionist my name, and explained the reason for my visit. I was directed to the conference room on the 12th floor, and I hurried to the elevator. The building was 30 stories high, and the elevator moved incredibly fast. But the ride to the 12th floor felt like an eternity, something I'd never experienced before. When I finally reached the meeting room and knocked on the door, I walked in to find the clients and my team already seated, all eyes turning toward me. I apologized for being late, and when they asked why, I explained what had happened in the park. My team believed me, but Kevin didn't. "Kyle, what the hell were you doing making the clients wait?" This is why a high school grad is useless. Even though I bowed my head in apology, Kevin's tirade didn't stop. "You can't even be on time, no wonder you can't get a girlfriend. You'll be single forever with that attitude. And seriously, that ugly tie? At least try to look decent." He kept insulting me, bringing up things that had nothing to do with work. Finally, he sneered, "Helping a homeless person? At least come up with a better lie. There aren't homeless women just lying around everywhere." As Kevin continued to berate me, I kept bowing and apologizing to the client. By the time I arrived, the presentation materials had already been distributed to everyone, and Kevin was about to give the presentation. Since Kevin couldn't handle preparing the documents, his only role as a manager was to present them. As I flipped through the materials, something felt off. "Wait. This isn't right, something's off." As I was looking through the documents, I started to panic, and soon the client spoke up, noticing the discrepancy. "Kevin, it seems that the presentation you're giving doesn't match the materials we have in front of us." Kevin, realizing this, quickly glanced at the documents. They were indeed different from what he was presenting. Upon closer inspection, the only sections that were wrong were the ones I had been responsible for. "We deeply apologize for the oversight in distributing incomplete materials," Kevin said, bowing to the client. He then requested a chance to redo the presentation at a later time, but the client responded, "We'll need to think about it. For today, you can go." Making such a fundamental mistake at the beginning of a $30 million project was unthinkable. Our team left the client's office and headed back to headquarters. "Kyle, you're fired. I never want to see your face again. A high school grad like you never should have been part of a major project like this. How are you going to take responsibility for a $30 million deal?" I had carefully scheduled everything and checked my work meticulously, so I had full confidence in the materials. I had even reviewed the documents just the day before, so there was no way I could have made such a simple mistake. None of my colleagues said a word to me. It made sense because they had all sacrificed their time and energy, working late into the night for this project. I bowed deeply and apologized to the team. But everyone silently walked ahead, heading back to the office. Even if I hadn't been late that day, the documents had already been distributed, so it wouldn't have been possible to change them on the spot. Back at the office, Kevin relayed the details of the meeting to Tyler. Later, Tyler called me into his office and told me to take some time off. So I sincerely apologized and left the office. At home, while soaking in the bath, the thought of getting fired kept running through my head. I worked so hard to get into this company, but I'm probably getting fired. After my bath, I sat in front of my computer, browsing job sites, but all the listings required a college degree. There wasn't a single position where I could apply my current skills with just a high school diploma. It's impossible. Disheartened, I went to bed. A few days into my leave, my mother came to visit. I had vented to her over the phone about what had happened, and she was worried. I made your favorite dish. Eat up and cheer up. No matter what happens, I'll always be on your side. She encouraged me before heading back home. I didn't want to make her worry or burden her any more than I already had. Feeling stuck in my room wasn't doing me any good, so I decided to go out for a change of pace the next day. The following morning, I left home, but oddly enough, I left at the same time I usually do for work. My body remembers. I thought with a wry smile as I stepped outside. The weekday mornings are so quiet. Walking the familiar route, I noticed how different the neighborhood felt during the quiet of a weekday morning. My feet naturally led me to the small park I often cut through on my way to work. I thought I'd take a break there, but as I approached the bench, I saw a woman already sitting there, as if she were waiting for someone. The park only had one bench. Oh, someone's already sitting there. I decided to keep walking, giving up on sitting down, but just as I was passing by, the woman suddenly stood up and looked directly at me. I glanced at her and felt my breath catch in my throat. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with features so striking they seemed almost otherworldly. To my surprise, she walked toward me and spoke. "Thank you so much for helping me the other day. I've been waiting here because I really wanted to thank you in person." She bowed deeply in front of me. Did I help you with something? I couldn't recall ever helping someone this beautiful. Maybe she's confusing me with someone else? I thought, staying silent for a moment. Then she explained, it was me who had called the ambulance when she had collapsed the other day. "Ah, you're the homeless woman from that day." It finally dawned on me. The woman introduced herself as Madeline. In a flustered moment, I awkwardly smiled and introduced myself as Kyle. Have you lost some weight?" she asked. I replied vaguely, "Well, a lot has happened." Trying to brush it off, but then I suddenly felt the urge to tell her everything. After all, none of this was her fault. I knew that the mix-up with the documents was my responsibility, and I should have double-checked them. But for some reason, I felt an overwhelming need to vent my frustrations to her. I explained the events of that day, the incident with the documents, and why I ended up in my current situation. After listening to my story, Madeline looked down and said in a sorrowful voice, "I'm so sorry, it's my fault." Seeing the sadness in her expression, I was jolted back to reality. Why did I tell her all of this? I thought, feeling a wave of self-loathing for burdening her with my troubles. No, it's not your fault. This was entirely my mistake, so please don't worry about it. I desperately tried to reassure her, but she kept her head down. Just as I was regretting my words, she slowly lifted her head, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. Her beautiful, clear eyes made my heart race. "But, it's strange for your section chief, Kevin, to reprimand you like that in front of the client. From what you've told me, I can't help but think Kevin is suspicious. It doesn't make sense that the documents you worked so hard to prepare were suddenly swapped out." After listening to me, she said that Kevin seemed suspicious. But I had no proof that he was involved. I don't believe I could have mistakenly switched the documents myself, but I don't have any evidence that Kevin did it either. There's nothing I can do, but thank you for caring. Her expression grew more intense. It's obvious that Kevin did it. He probably couldn't stand being told what to do by someone with less education. People like him exist, especially among the sons of wealthy families, she said with conviction. Sons of wealthy families. Of course. She must be from a prestigious family. She's out of my league, I thought. I'll help you, Kyle. Let's overcome this together. Saying that, she took my hand, which I was just staring at in confusion, and squeezed it tightly. If I had a mirror, I was sure my face would have been bright red. The next day, I received a sudden call from the company, asking me to come in immediately. Rushing to the office, I was told to go to the president's office. I knocked on the door and entered. Inside, I saw Kevin, pale-faced, Mr. Harrison, looking stern, and our client from the recent meeting. And standing beside the client was none other than Madeline. Mr. Harrison approached me and started speaking. I've heard everything from Tyler, as well as from your colleagues. I understand the situation now. You're not at fault. Everything was Kevin's doing. I looked around at everyone's faces, realizing the truth. So it was Kevin. He swapped the documents. Mr. Harrison explained what had happened. Kevin, who had joined the company through family connections, had been infuriated that a high school graduate had been assigned as his mentor. He couldn't tolerate the idea of someone with less education giving him orders. When he saw that I, a high school graduate, was participating in a $30 million project, he couldn't stand it. He concocted a plan to sabotage me, swapping out only the documents I had prepared in order to derail the project and have me sent off to a remote branch. He had even offered money to his colleagues to help him create alternate documents, but they had all refused him in a professional manner. Left with no one to help him, Kevin had created and distributed the false documents himself. This information came to light when some of his colleagues reported the incident to Tyler. However, Tyler hesitated to report it to Mr. Harrison, especially since he had no solid evidence. Kevin barely understood our company's system because he had delegated most of his work on the system to his subordinates. The fact that he hadn't properly deleted the documents became crucial evidence when the data for the fake reports was found intact after restoring Kevin's folder. After Mr. Harrison finished explaining, Madeline began to speak. Upon hearing my story the previous day, she had realized that the deal in question was between her father's company and ours. When she got home, she pleaded with her father to give me another chance, explaining how I had helped her. Her father, sensing something was off, had requested that Mr. Harrison investigate the situation, leading to the discovery of Kevin's deceit. Wait, she's the daughter of Mr. Hudson, the president of the client company. As I listened, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the situation. When the conversation ended and I stepped outside the room, Madeline followed behind me. She then told me the full story. Her father had been strongly urging her into an arranged marriage with a man she didn't know. Not wanting to marry someone she had no feelings for, she rebelled and ran away from home. With no money and wandering aimlessly for days, she survived by drinking water from a park fountain to stave off her hunger. Eventually, she reached her limit and collapsed in the park where I found her. When she was taken to the hospital, the doctors diagnosed her with severe gastritis and stomach ulcers caused by stress and malnutrition. She used the money I gave her to pay her medical bills, but as soon as she left the hospital, she was found by someone her parents had hired to search for her and was brought back home. Now, she told me, she was feeling much better and could even enjoy her favorite barbecue again. Madeline had been waiting in the park every day during my usual commute time because she wanted to thank me in person. While we were talking, Mr. Hudson approached me from behind. I just wanted my daughter to be happy, but I made decisions selfishly without considering her feelings. I'm ashamed of myself. Thank you for saving her. I would love to work directly with you," he said, offering me a handshake. I hesitated for a moment but then shook his hand. After that, Madeline and I started going out for meals, and eventually, we began dating. One day, during lunch at a cafe, I couldn't help but ask her something that had been on my mind. "Why did you offer to help me that day? You could have just thanked me and left it at that." She looked at me seriously and began to explain. "That day, when I heard your story, I realized the business deal was with my father's company. I also felt responsible for what had happened. I was certain the mistake wasn't your fault after listening to you, so I wanted my father to investigate and find the truth. And more than anything, I wanted to help you because you were so kind. You helped me, a stranger, by carrying me to the bench and even paying for my hospital bills." As she said this, she shyly looked down, her face softening. I couldn't help but feel a deep affection for her and found myself staring at her with admiration. Thanks to Mr. Hudson's strong recommendation, I was appointed as the lead on the project, and I began working to move it forward. When people at the office found out I was dating the client's daughter, some were envious, commenting on how lucky I was to be with someone so beautiful, but they all laughed and congratulated me, saying it made sense given the circumstances. I would be lying if I said I didn't hold a grudge against Kevin for what he did. But remembering my father's words, "Even if someone betrays you, never betray others," helped me let go of that resentment. Kevin was eventually demoted and sent to a remote branch, where he was retrained alongside new hires as a regular employee. His salary and bonuses were reduced to the same level as the newcomers, and he was abandoned by his family and his fiancée, leaving him to live a lonely life. Now, I'm driving with my mother to visit my father's grave on the anniversary of his death. I want to tell him about my engagement to Madeline. As my mother quietly gazes out the window, she suddenly speaks. "I never imagined that incident would lead to all of this. Life is full of surprises. I'm sure your father is smiling down on us now," she murmurs softly, looking up at the sky through the window. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, I quietly whisper to myself, "Dad, you don't have to worry anymore." I know I made Mom worry, leaving her feeling alone all this time, but now I understand. I've found someone I love, and I'll protect her and Mom from now on. Rest easy, Dad. I whispered these words in my heart as I gazed at the beautiful blue sky beyond the windshield,